In 2023, the United States spent more on interest payments on its national debt than on its entire defense budget. Not on the debt itself, just the interest. For the first time in American history, the cost of past spending exceeded the cost of protecting the present. Most analysts called it a fiscal problem. They were right, but they were missing the historical context that makes it terrifying. Because this has happened before, to the most powerful empire in the world, to a city that had held for 1,000 years against every army that came for it. Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, was protected by the most sophisticated defensive system ever built. Triple walls, Greek fire, a military tradition that had repelled every invader for 10 centuries. It fell in 1453, not because its walls failed, they never failed. It fell because its treasury did. And the sequence of events that emptied that treasury reads like a financial autopsy of a superpower in slow decline, one that is still being written today. To understand what happened to Constantinople, you need to understand what it was, not just a city, a system. At its peak under Justinian in the 6th century, Constantinople was the largest, wealthiest, and most sophisticated city in the Western world. Its population exceeded 500,000, larger than any city in Europe would be for another 800 years. Its walls were an engineering marvel. The Theodosian Walls, triple-layered, 15 meters high, backed by a moat, had repelled Huns, Avars, Arabs, Bulgarians, Vikings, and Crusaders for 1,000 years. But the walls were only the visible part of the system. The invisible part was the economy that funded them. Constantinople sat at the intersection of every major trade route connecting Europe to Asia. Every merchant ship passing between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean paid tolls. The silk trade, the spice trade, the grain trade, all of it flowed through Constantinople. All of it generated revenue. All of it funded the walls, the army, the navy, the bureaucracy, and the diplomatic relationships that kept enemies at bay without fighting. The walls didn't defend Constantinople. The economy defended Constantinople. The walls were what the economy built. Today, the United States maintains the most powerful military in human history. Its aircraft carriers, its nuclear arsenal, its global network of bases, these are the walls. But like the Theodosian Walls, they are not the source of power. They are the product of it. The source is the economy, the dollar's reserve status, the productivity of American workers and institutions. When the economy that funds the walls begins to weaken, the walls don't fall immediately. They stand. They look exactly as they always did, but the system supporting them is quietly changing. Constantinople's walls stood until the very end, but the system that once made them invincible had been hollowing out for 2 centuries before the final siege. The Byzantine Empire didn't lose Constantinople in a single catastrophic defeat. It lost it across 200 years of compounding fiscal decisions, each one rational in isolation, each one contributing to a trajectory that ended in collapse. It began with the Fourth Crusade in 1204. Crusaders who were supposed to fight in the Holy Land turned instead on Constantinople, a Christian city, and sacked it. For 3 days, the accumulated wealth of 8 centuries was stripped, melted, and shipped west. The physical damage was repaired, the financial damage was not. To fund the recovery, Byzantine emperors began debasing their currency, the hyperpyron, reducing its gold content the same way Rome had debased the denarius. To raise immediate cash, they sold trade privileges to Venetian and Genoese merchants. The consequences were catastrophic. Within a generation, Italian merchants controlled the most profitable trade routes through Byzantine territory and paid no tolls on them. The empire's primary revenue stream was handed to foreign competitors for short-term cash. Sound familiar? In 2001, the United States began financing 2 simultaneous wars through deficit spending rather than taxation. The immediate cost was manageable. The compounding interest on that decision has not stopped accumulating since. Each short-term solution, each rational decision in isolation, each one narrowing the options available to the next generation of decision-makers. Constantinople's emperors were not foolish. They were trapped. trapped by the consequences of decisions made before them, making decisions that would trap those who came after. By the 14th century, the Byzantine Empire had been reduced to a shadow of itself. The territory that once stretched from Spain to Mesopotamia had shrunk to the city of Constantinople itself and a handful of outposts. The trade revenues that once funded the largest military in the world were now flowing to Venetian and Genoese merchants who paid nothing for the privilege. The army shrank, not because emperors wanted a smaller army, because there was no money to pay a larger one. Mercenaries replaced professional soldiers. Mercenaries are more expensive per unit than professional soldiers and less reliable in a siege. But when you cannot afford to maintain a standing army, mercenaries are what you can afford. The Navy, once the terror of the Mediterranean, was sold off piece by piece to cover operating expenses. By the 14th century, the empire that had once launched fleets of hundreds of warships could barely maintain a dozen. When Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II arrived before the walls of Constantinople on April 6, 1453, the city's defenders numbered approximately 7,000 men. 7,000 men defending 15 miles of wall. The city that had repelled armies of hundreds of thousands with ease now faced the most powerful military force in the world with the resources of a minor provincial town. Now, consider this. The United States military budget is the largest in history, but it is funded by a government that borrows 40 cents of every dollar it spends. The interest payments on that borrowing now exceed the defense budget itself. The walls are still there. The financial foundation beneath them is not what it was. I need to stop here for a second and say something. I know this is a small channel, you can see that. And the fact that you're here, watching this, giving this video a chance, that alone tells me I'm on the right track. If you're enjoying this series, a like, a comment, even just finishing the video, it means more than you'd think. And if you have an idea for what the next topic should be, drop it in the comments. I read everything. If something isn't working, the pacing, the topic, anything, tell me in the comments or the community tab. I'd genuinely rather know. Your input shapes where this channel goes. So, thank you for being here. Now, let's get back to it. On April 6, 1453, Mehmed II's army of 80,000 men arrived before the walls of Constantinople. Inside the city, Emperor Constantine XI had 7,000 defenders, and nearly empty treasury, and allies who had promised help and delivered none. The Venetians sent ships, too few, too late. The Pope offered financial support, conditional on a religious union that the Byzantine population refused. The Genoese sent a single commander, Giovanni Giustiniani, with 700 men. 700 men from a city that's merchants had been extracting profit from Byzantine trade routes for 2 centuries while the empire slowly collapsed. The siege lasted 53 days. For 53 days, 7,000 defenders held 15 miles of wall against 80,000 attackers. The Theodosian Walls did exactly what they were designed to do. They held. But Mehmed had something no previous attacker possessed. An Hungarian engineer named Urban had offered his services and his enormous bronze cannon to the Byzantine emperor first. Constantine XI could not afford to pay him. Urban went to Mehmed, who could. On May 29, 1453, Ottoman forces breached the walls. Constantine XI died fighting. The city that stood for 1,000 years fell in a single morning. The walls didn't fail. The financial foundation that should have paid for their defense had been empty for decades. Not everyone was lost in the fall of Constantinople, and the ones who survived and the ones who carried something of value out of the wreckage did so through decisions made long before the walls were breached. First, they had moved portable wealth out of the city before the siege. The Byzantine scholars and intellectuals who fled to Italy in the decades before 1453, carrying manuscripts, knowledge, and expertise, didn't just save their own lives, they carried the accumulated intellectual wealth of Greek civilization into Renaissance Europe. The fall of Constantinople is one of the most significant triggers of the Italian Renaissance. The knowledge that escaped the city transformed Western civilization. Portable wealth survives what fixed assets cannot. Second, they had diversified their geographic exposure. Byzantine merchants who had established trading relationships in Venice, Genoa, and Alexandria before the fall had somewhere to go and something to go to. Those whose entire economic existence was located inside the walls had nothing. Geographic diversification is not a modern financial concept, it is a survival strategy as old as civilization. Third, they carried transferable skills rather than fixed assets. A Byzantine craftsman whose skill was in his hands rather than his tools could rebuild anywhere. A landowner whose wealth was in Constantinople real estate lost everything when the city changed hands. The most portable wealth has always been knowledge and expertise. Today, this logic applies with equal force. Digital assets can cross borders, physical assets often cannot. Expertise travels, real estate doesn't. Relationships survive institutional collapse. Titles and credentials issued by failing institutions often don't. The Byzantine refugees who carried Greek manuscripts to Italy changed history. They didn't save the empire, but they saved what mattered most about it. Constantinople held for 1,000 years. 1,000 years of invasions repelled, 1,000 years of walls that never failed, 1,000 years of a military system that was the envy of the world. And then, over 2 centuries of compounding fiscal decisions, the financial foundation beneath that military system quietly eroded. The walls didn't know. They stood exactly as they always had. The army shrank, the navy disappeared, the treasury emptied, the allies grew distant. The revenue streams were sold to foreign merchants for short-term cash. And when the final test came, when a determined enemy with modern weapons arrived at those ancient walls, the empire discovered that the system which had protected it for a millennium had been hollowing out for 200 years. The walls fell in a morning. The financial decline that made them vulnerable had taken 2 centuries. This series has traced 5 collapses across 3,000 years of history: a Bronze Age supply chain, a Roman currency, an ancient trade network, a Dutch financial bubble, a Byzantine empire. 5 different civilizations, 5 different systems, 5 different causes. And in every case, the same pattern. The visible structure, the walls, the currency, the trade routes, the market, lasted longer than the invisible foundation supporting it. By the time the structure fell, the foundation had been gone for years. The question this series leaves with you is not whether modern systems will face similar pressures. They already are. The question is whether you can see the foundation, not the walls. This is where the When Systems Collapse series ends, but the conversation continues in The Real Economic Truth, where we go deeper into the individuals, the decisions, and the moments that determined who survived when systems collapsed and who didn't. See you there.